Happy Friday, parish orphans and retrogrades. Today we will be talking about Pope Benedict Emeritus and any kinds of unlikely theories that he's still Pope, which is to say we're talking about Pope Francis as well, and any coextensive unlikely theories that he is not Pope. Now, I have been very, very, very touch and go, careful, cautious with this topic because it is such a cautious topic. But I have not been on either side that he definitely is or definitely isn't. Any theory to the extent that B16 is still Pope has to be called at this point unlikely. There's only one writer out there, writer, thinker, Catholic, who has shared my caution, but has also to be trouble to write about this to some extent. And he also has an interest in the St. Gallen Mafia. And his name is Stephen O'Reilly. He's written articles at LifeSite News and on his site, Roma Locuta Est. Stephen, thanks for coming with me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Steve, yeah. Steve Bannon, you sometimes double as in movies, right? Yeah. No, you guys, when we had the honor to meet in Atlanta a few months back, I was giving a talk there. I just thought, wow, Steve Bannon came to my talk. I've really made it, when I looked out there and saw you. But no, okay. So what's up, Steve? How are you doing? Thanks for joining me on
Doing great. Doing great. Hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I hope you did too. Hope you did too. Look, here's the thing, man. I love how a couple of your articles begin. We're going to be talking about 3 of your articles today. One is the most recent one is the Unsolved Mysteries article on LifeSite. I'll link all 3 of these in the show notes. There's also one called Benedict's Resignation on Roma Locuta Est, and Curiouser and Curiouser also on your site, which is a great title. I really like the way you begin the Benedict's Resignation article because it's duly careful with this topic. Now, not so careful that we can't talk about it, but I'd just like you to say, Steve, a preliminary word, if you'd be willing, which recasts the caution, the caveat of Benedict's resignation, the way you open there. I think it's really, really appropriate. This is not the most cautious thing we've ever spake, but it's up there. There have been almost 40 anti-popes in the history of the church, which means on average, we've had 20 Christian centuries. That's almost 2 per century. So it is a thing that happens ex post. After the fact, a pope can be declared an anti-pope, meaning he was never pope. It's a nullity. And so we have to be careful when we're looking, adducing, weighing evidence.
Exactly.
But anyway, you say your piece, because I like the way you tend to wrap this thing up.
Sure. I don't recall offhand exactly what I said in that article to lead off, but my view is that certainly from all appearances, right, Francis is Pope. I mean, he's gone through all the processes. We have at least a resignation that appears on the face to be valid. So I think Catholics have to consider him at least the putative Pope. That if you were going to suggest that he is not Pope, then you have to have some excellent evidence to back that up. I at the site have kind of looked at some of the various theories that are out there, and some of them, such as the Benedict is Pope, or the BIP theory, as I've nicknamed it, not as a pejorative. I mean, some have accused that of being a pejorative, but it's not. It's just simply Benedict is Pope, or Benedict is still Pope. That's the theory, and that's based on the Declaratio. Basically, that theory is based on that somehow there was some sort of deficiency in his resignation itself, and therefore he's still Pope. Therefore, Francis' election is not. But for any other type of theory out there, you have to have some evidence to back it up. I mean, I don't see. I reject the Declaratio-based theory. I have looked at some other theories, as you said, like the Jesuit vow theory, which is the Curiouser article. But also, since the St. Gallen Mafia stuff came up, that was very interesting because there you had clearly the case of some campaigning going on, and whether or not that was in violation of some of the canons or the papal legislation on conclaves, whether there's some violations there. So I have looked closely at that, and the McCarrick and the influential Italian gentleman, and some of the kind of bizarre things that did go on around the conclave that raised questions in my mind that at least I think should be explored more. But ultimately, my position is that, just to kind of sum up here, is that Francis, most likely a pope, and you need a very good set of evidence to kind of overcome that obstacle. But I certainly understand folks looking around for theories, because it is a very troubling papacy, as your viewers well know.
Yeah, it's a great preliminary word, and we're going to get to that in a second. It would be a splendor if Francis turned out to be the 38th anti-pope. No. Because if he stands as pope, he's the worst. He's superlatively bad. He's unprecedentedly bad, et cetera, et cetera. So it would just be, if we give in to wishful thinking, and maybe we'll be indulged, sometimes wishful thinking is, it would be a delightful thing. So we're going to get to what is a less unlikely iteration of the theory that Francis is not pope right after this word. First off, I would like to hail this channel's patrons, loyal, faithful patrons. Benefits will be enhanced in 2022. And I would also like to point out that a week from yesterday, next Thursday, we have our next St. Luke's Single Society meeting, led by myself. That is the $20 patron tier. It's where young retrogrades can meet each other, young women and young men. Thank you guys very much. The benefits will be enhanced, and we look forward to 2022 on Patreon. Timothy J. Gordon. Also, get from your blue state to a red state. Do so by going to realestateforlife.org. People know how personal this is for me and how much I believe it. If the republic is to survive, it's going to be by a super coagulated blood red swath of red states. Get to one today. Go to realestateforlife.org. And last but not least, those who have enrolled in classes this fall, which are coming to a close next week on Retrograde Classical Academy, know that there is a second semester of Latin 1, which has opened up. If you go to timothyjgordon.com, you can enroll in that. If you were in it this semester, it is for a heavily discounted price, the second semester of Latin 1. Also, I have opened a constitutional intro course, an intro to the Constitution, as this spring, 2022, which is the semester under question, will be the run-up period to us hearing in June the decision to Dobbs versus Jackson, the most important constitutional case ever, right? Where we actually can end Roe versus Wade. And so people can get, in the run-up to that time, a better grasp on the Constitution. Do so by going to timothyjgordon.com. Okay, Steve. So first, would you give a quick synopsis of why the standard declaratio Benedictus Pope theory is not compelling? Because I think I'm fully with you here, and you're going to get some hate for saying this stuff, but hey, it has to be said. We are searching the truth. If Benedict really is still Pope, it will be on some other theory besides this one. I think the declaratio theory, you and I agree, is very weak.
I do get some hate mail on that. In terms of the Benedict, there's really, I think, two kind of main bit theories, I guess I call them. One is based on the declaratio, and that's some sort of deficiency in his intent, in Benedict's intent, in terms of what he wrote, whether or not he resigned the ministry, did he resign the munus, which is all the kind of the Latin-based argument. But then there's also a theory that would be that he did not resign freely. And that's really irrespective of what he said in the declaratio. And that's really one thing that I think is open to more investigation.
Agreed.
It would be, but it would take a lot of excellent information or some great evidence to come forward. I don't think that there's no evidence to suggest that now. I mean, there's certainly a lot of odd things just to explore, and that's the part one of the articles you mentioned, the Benedict resignation. Part one of that, in part two, kind of look into that. But then I also think back to, I think it was like last year that Cardinal Burke appeared on, I think it was Patrick Coffin's show. And he was asked, Mr. Coffin asked a lot of questions about like the St. Gallen Mafia, that sort of thing. And could this be invalidate the conclave? And Cardinal Burke gave an interesting question, interesting answer. I don't want to put too many words into his mouth, but as I understood him, that you need really two conditions for it to be an invalid conclave. One is that there would have to be evidence that there was a plot basically to undermine the papacy of Benedict. And then on the other part, you would need evidence that there was actual, plotting to get Bergoglio in this case elected as Pope. I think there's a lot of evidence or suggestions out there that there was some of that going on the conclave part. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on there. Whether or not there's enough evidence on that they undermined the papacy to the extent to say that his resignation was not free, that's a large question right there.
It's a high burden of persuasion to show that he was actually compelled, such that it would be like a nullity or what we'd call an affirmative defense. So like, yes, I resigned, but they had a gun to my head or some such.
That's right. I mean, that's clearly not the case. I mean, people have been visiting Benedict for the last 8 years here. He's given no indication, like, help me, or blinking his eyes, SOS, or anything like that. He's actually traveled out of the Vatican, I think, to see his brother when he was sick. So people have written books with him and all that, had tons of interviews, no suggestion that. The only kind of, I think, some problem with the freedom would be only if they kind of enticed him to resign by some deception. And then whether or not the canonists would say that itself is free or not. I'm not a canonist, so I couldn't say if that kind of deceit would qualify as to nullify his resignation.
Okay, so people, for the sake of clarity, for parish orphans and retrogrades out there, the two-part theory, which with two prongs, that Steve here has written about giving up a synopsis of the two prongs he's interpreting from Cardinal Burke, is that there would have to have been some sort of conspiracy against the Benedict pontificate during the Benedict pontificate. St. Gallen Mafia, I think, forms at least the strong part of a beginning argument, an inchoate argument there. I want to make one remark after this. Part B is there has to be some sort of canvassing or conspiracy or campaigning, illicit campaigning before, during the conclave, which followed upon Benedict. Now, Steve, you said just now that you think B is a strong showing. I think A is a pretty strong showing just by virtue of the fact that, I have Julia Maloney's book right here, which I wrote the foreword for. There is such a thing as the St. Gallen Mafia, which we know about, that traces back to the mid-90s. And it is an admission by a party opponent, Cardinal Daniels, one of the members of the St. Gallen Mafia. It was a mid-90s through mid-2000s conspiracy to avoid a Benedict XVI pontificate. And of course, when I first learned of this 4 or 5 years ago, I said, well, what were they doing during the entire Benedict pontificate once they lost, the St. Gallen Mafia, and he did become Pope? Well, Julia Maloney's new book and some other articles, I think, Steve, you've written some on this, they were doing some stuff, some skullduggery during the Benedict pontificate. So the question is, does that stuff they were doing amount to that high material showing requisite to actually call it a forced resignation or, fraud in the inducement or any of the affirmative defenses?
Right. In a recent, like I said, two-part article I wrote, there's a lot of strange things that are suggestive that maybe something's going on. I think Julia wrote about or talked about a recent article that there was even a St. Gallen meeting in, I think, April-ish of 2012. We do know, going back to the conclave of 2005, 2006, Martini had approached Ratzinger at that time and kind of said, hey, there's this other guy out here we don't like. You're a trustworthy guy. You're an honest man. I'll throw my support behind you. No, let's reform the Curia. But if you can't do that, you have to resign. So that's kind of like the proposition, the predicate that Martini laid back in 2005, 2006. And then oddly enough, after the outbreak of or maybe not so oddly enough, after the outbreak of the vatileaks scandal, which embarrassed Benedict quite a bit, you have Martini approaching Ratzinger now, or Pope Benedict the 16th in June, saying, you failed, you did not reform it, now it's time to step aside. So it's almost like the question is, was vatileaks? The question in my mind is, and I'm not saying it is, but if you were to write, say, a great fiction novel or something like that, that it would seem, I would wonder in my mind, did the St. Gallen Mafia have something to do with the vatileaks scandal, behind the scenes, as a way of embarrassing Benedict and kind of leading him to the conclusion that I can't govern, which is kind of what Martini followed up and basically said in June, and that kind of induced Benedict to resign. So that's what I would kind of think is what happened if we operate under that hypothesis.
It's Father Silvano Fausti that's reporting all this, that's right? Isn't it?
Yep.
A close personal friend of Martini.
Martini.
Yeah. For people who don't know, Cardinal Martini is the Don, the leader of the St. Gallen Mafia that started it all, and was like Pope John Paul II, whom he had very little love for. He was yielding over a decade plus to Parkinson's disease, right? But it's his friend and well-wisher and fanboy, Father Silvano Fausti, who says this, according to your Roma Locuta Est article, Steve.
Yeah.
Quote, Martini apparently handed his votes over to Ratzinger in order to avoid foul play. This is back in 2005 at the conclave, which elected Benedict, which attempted to eliminate both in order to elect a thoroughly obsequious member of the Curia who didn't make it. According to Fausti, Ratzinger and Martini had more votes, Martini a few more than Ratzinger. There had apparently been a scheme to elect a Curia cardinal. Once the ploy had been unveiled, Martini went to Ratzinger in the evening and said to him, I always heard this was at a lunchtime meeting between the third and the fourth scrutinies of the right. 2005 conclave. He says to him, they were walking arm in arm, and he says to him, tomorrow you agree to become pope with my votes. He said to him, you accept, you have been in the Curia for 30 years, you are intelligent and honest. Bear in mind, this is Martini who formed a club, St. Gallen Mafia Club, in order to keep Ratzinger out of the pontificate. Now he's disingenuously saying, hey, you take it at this 2005 conclave. You've been in the Curia for 30 years. You're intelligent and honest. If you manage to reform the Curia, great. Doesn't sound like words that this former of the one who formed the Gallen Club would say. But if not, you step down. This is Martini Benedict's 16th resignation in the 2005 conclave. Are you speculating that essentially, perhaps, it was some sort of collusion between the butler and the Gallen Mafia that produced the vatileaks scandal, which would be the actuator of this if-then conditional?
Well, again, I'm speaking purely hypothetical. I'm not alleging that, but I'm saying that if one were to go down the road of thinking, what are the possible theories that you could really invalidate a conclave based on, if my understanding of what Cardinal Burke had mentioned, or my reading of Cardinal Burke's statement to Patrick Coffin, is that hypothetically, where would be the places to look for evidence? And that would seem it's very odd that you have Martini kind of laying the predicate and then coming back right after the vatileaks erupts and really embarrasses the heck out of Benedict. Kind of showed him that he couldn't, he couldn't rule past his door. I think he had made a comment like that to somebody. So that's curious. And then in my article, I kind of explore some other things which I found were pretty interesting. Is that if you look at Nuzzi's the Italian journalist who kind of interviewed Paolo Gabriele and got the documents from him, it's a pretty wide conspiracy. There are a lot of folks within the Vatican who are helping Gabriele, you kind of doing kind of counter surveillance of meetings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of wise. So I started thinking, well, could this be like a false flag? Maybe they all thought, or some of them thought, or Gabriele certainly did, thought he was helping Benedict. That's kind of naive for him to have thought that. So did someone take advantage of that kind of guy? But it'd be nice to interview him, but he's dead. He died, I think it was last year.
Right.
Dead men tell no tales. So that's, and I'm not suggesting he was murdered, but it would have been nice to have interviewed someone like that.
Yes, it would. You're talking about the butler, right?
The butler, yeah, the butler.
Yeah,
and whether
the butler
or not
who has this oddly very conspicuous role in the vatileaks scandal. If you look into that, Parish Orphans and Retrogrades, take a look.
Very strange. He thought he was helping Benedict, and these people that were helping him get these documents to Nuzzi apparently, allegedly, kind of thought the same way, that they were like the white hats within the Vatican. But certainly one can conjecture whether or not that kind of naivete, was taken advantage of, or kind of, fed by, more darker forces. But then looking around, so you had a lot of people, though, but if it was a conspiracy, that takes money. So I looked around. I noticed in Henry Sira's book, The Dictator Pope, that when Cardinal Bergoglio, he was the chancellor of the Catholic University of Buenos Aires, and during his time, over like a 5-10 year period, had transferred money to the Vatican Bank, like $30-40 million, and that was eventually turned into a gift. And I don't know if the money knows where it went to, but Henry Sira in his book suggests that it was used for influence. Now, he wasn't linking these two theories, and I'm not saying the money went to that, but that's certainly something that raises an eyebrow. And that those transfers ended around 2012, according to Sira's book.
That's conspicuous, also. There's a lot. There are many threads to pull from here. I want to remind people a couple things. Normies on this issue will say, hey, it doesn't matter how many of these conditions for anti-pope are met. They're essentially setting a standard so high that there can have been 0 anti-popes in the history of our bimillennial papacy, right? Which is ridiculous, because we've had like 37. But they'll say if a pope is peacefully accepted, then it doesn't really matter what happens. Peacefully accepted means all the bishops of the world accept the pope. Now, is that a hard 100%? Is it a quorum? Is it, that's, and I'm not asking you, Steve. I'm telling people to keep that fact at the back of their mind, that there is this perhaps intentionally ambiguous description of what the requirement of peaceful acceptance by the bishops, and I guess the Sensus Fidelium, of a pope amounts to. Is it 100.0%? I mean, there's Bishop Gracida, right, of Corpus Christi, who has never accepted Francis as pope. So does that mean that there is not peaceful acceptance? On the other hand, Francis has been accepted by almost all the other bishops of the world, maybe all of them. And that does stand as unique to the 37 instances of anti-pope, where it was like a third of the church thought it was this guy, 2/3 thought it was this guy. In some cases, like Avignon, coming out of Avignon, there were like 3 candidates for pope. So it's more like a third, or half. That's one difficulty to the idea. One difficulty that must be negotiated, that must be overcome, superseded. Absolutely. For the Beniplenist types that want to say, well, look, the St. Gallen Mafia. I've always thought the St. Gallen Mafia, this countervails the other way, is the best justification for a Beniplenist. Look into that. I don't know it. I think Francis is the Pope, but I'm definitely open to hearing more about St. Gallen Mafia, which is what I tell Julia Maloney. Everyone should read her book. But at the same time, what of this issue of peaceful acceptance of the Pope? It does seem like all of Christendom has accepted Francis as a Pope, albeit a horrible one, the worst one. So that needs to be negotiated at some point. Do you agree with that, Steve?
I do. No, it's you can't ignore it. It's something out there. But I mean, I think, but if facts come forward, that would all have to be adjudicated anyway. If there was some level of evidence that was reached, then we're talking about it's not for you or I or some of the other voices out there on social media to say that Benedict still is or Francis is not. That would take. We'd probably be looking at the next pontificate or two, some pope having commission to look at this evidence to say whatever that evidence might be and say, yeah, this guy was an anti-pope. But I'm not going to, bet, this year's salary on that. So,
Yeah. What I don't, on that note, here's something I don't get. I don't get either side of this issue claiming a dignified, irritated certainty as against the other side. I mean, as a faithful son of the church, you have to say, look, until it's been declared, I believe Francis is Pope. But I don't get the side like I was talking to Mark Brumley at Ignatius Press on Twitter about this. He was mocking Patrick Coffin, who's seems a good bit more certain, not altogether certain, than I am that Francis isn't Pope. And Brumley he seemed so irritated. I'm like, look, we've had 37 anti-popes. And if ever there was a case when we should be hoping, which is not to say necessarily being certain, but hoping that a pope is an anti-pope, it would be Francis. It would be very convenient for all the goodly sons and daughters of Holy Mother Church, right? I don't get why some of the Benedict is Pope crowd get so mad at you because you've done good work, Steve. I don't get why someone like Mark Brumley is so mad at Patrick Coffin, who's a good deal more certain, so he says, than you or I, that Benedict is Pope, but he still doesn't claim 100% certitude. I don't get why this can't be one of those issues where people can't just be like, let's look at it. It would be a hell of a good thing if Francis was not Pope. He probably is, but let's hope he's not. There are some facts to sniff out and dig out here.
Yeah, well, I think there certainly are those who think or do not think that Francis is Pope. I mean, I think we've talked about that. There's a lot of reasons out there to think or to wonder why or wonder if he still is. I mean, a lot of strange things have happened. Amoris Laetitia, the death penalty thing and Pachamama and all that. But I do think that a lot of the bippers out there who look at the resignation letter are too they're going beyond, I think, what the evidence suggests to be as firm in their belief. I mean, I was just looking online. There's apparently some sort of petition out there, just looking at the from Rome site, which is referencing another website, which actually doesn't open when I link on it, but they talk about any future election that they declare their faithfulness to Pope Benedict XVI, and they're declaring that any future papal election made under any of the following circumstances will lack canonical validity. And they go through and list that. Some of it is you can't have Francis's cardinals in there. Now, if you go down that route, you're just setting up to become a schism, once or when Francis and or Benedict dies, that this thing will be hard to heal. So I think people, I think it's fair to wonder, and
right.
I think one thing reasonably should say, putatively, it looks like Francis is. I would not exclude the possibility that he's not, but to act as if he's not with complete metaphysical certitude, I think is the wrong way to go.
Well, it's insane. It's also the only reason, the primary reason that you're the only person I've spoken to about this is because you hedge like an intelligent person with a forebrain. You hedge. You're like, look, putatively, we have to say that for now, we think Francis is Pope. I'm not going to go. You err on the side of caution, for heaven's sakes. These people, some of these religious people, they're like atheists iteration of religious people, dumb religious people that dive in head first to everything. They're just setting up a schism. I don't understand you. Can I say this, people? I don't understand you if you're leaving yourself no out there. As a philosopher, as a lawyer, I just say, unless you're certain of a mother's love, certain of the moral rectitude of the natural law, okay, go to bat for those things. But if there are a whole plethora of facts that by your own conspiracy theory, which might be true, but might not be, you say these facts are being hidden from you so you can't access them because they're being hidden by some powerful contingent of the curia. Well, then you have to admit epistemic humility. You have to say, hey, look, I don't have the knowledge to make the call here. I'm not the line judge. I wasn't close enough to see if the player's foot was out of bounds, but there's definitely enough evidence to say, hey, can we zero in on this corner of the screen and look at the player's foot as it was near the line? It's close to the line. That's fine. What's not fine is betting your house, betting your life, betting your wife and kids' salvation on something that you admit you don't have the evidence. By definition, the evidence has been hidden from you in order to make a proper call. I just don't get people that commit themselves to these things that are ultra vires to them.
Exactly. And I think going back to the example of the Declaratio as an example is that one of the pieces of evidence they'll use that Benedict only intended to resign the ministry and not the munus and kind of split this thing is to look at his last general audience, and where he talks about how always and forever, that they seem to interpret that as meaning, or his audience as suggesting that he is only resigning, the active ministry of the church, of the papacy. But you could also look at that at that last audience. You can certainly interpret it in the same as the sense that he was just resigning, had some very fatherly thoughts and about resigning, and about that he still has children. That when I became pope, I became father of the church, and I got true sons and daughters. And now that I'm resigning, it doesn't mean I'm going to leave you. I still love you, and I'm still going to pray as father. It can be also interpreted in a perfectly natural sense that he's truly resigning. But what one site basically said, anyone who says that is a liar. And they would have been open up to the possibility that maybe it can be looked at both ways. Let's wait and see if a future pope agrees with Steve or agrees with me or whoever. And that's that kind of metaphysical certainty, I think, is not there, or any kind of certainty should not be attached to the Benedict is still pope theory.
Also, if I'll be your father for always means that he's still pope, it would require that he's immortal, right? Unless he meant it in the construction you gave it. Hey, I just always will feel fatherly affection for.
Well, it's more. I don't have the wording of that section in front of me, but that's kind of the sentiment I think that to me comes through when you read his audience. I think in context is his word.
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah. Could we talk? Kind of by way of a slow closing here. Can we talk about your more recent LifeSite article, which came up just before Halloween of this year? It's entitled, "There are Still Many Unsolved Mysteries Surrounding the 2013 Election of Cardinal Bergoglio to the Papacy." Again, I like the title. I like your approach to this whole thing. There are unsolved mysteries. An unsolved mystery, that verbiage is very honest. It exercises the intellectual humility, the epistemic humility I'm looking for here. It's an unsolved mysteries. Remember that old 80s and early 90s TV show, Unsolved Mysteries? It has the mysterious music. It has the mysterious narration. It has the mysterious plot line. The reason people look into, Steve, unsolved mysteries is because by virtue of their obscurity, they're interesting. Because by virtue of the fact that we don't know the outcome, they're interesting. So this furthers what we're saying here, that it's like, we're not saying we know the answer to the mystery. We're saying it warrants another look. Okay. And this is what you open up the article saying. And I just think I'd like you to talk a little bit about it, if you would be willing to. A synopsis of the article goes like this: the narrative that Cardinal Bergoglio was a passive or even an unwitting beneficiary of the Gallen Mafia's initiatives on his behalf is impossible to accept. And that doesn't mean that he's not Pope, but it could mean that, right? That's what I like about. Would you explain what that little titular head means to the article?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of the Bergoglian acolytes out there, like the Iveres and Where Peter Is, or where Pacamama is website, who, you have this humble guy and just, oh, who, me? I'm Pope, that type of image, I think was certainly blown up in Henry Sira's book, The Dictator Pope, where you find out that he was like plotting, like, there are quotes from some of his sources that he was, plotting like mad all the while, pretending that he was indifferent about, what, the resignation of Benedict might mean to him. But some of the interesting things, some of the unsolved mysteries include, for example, that when he arrived in Rome, Benedict's resignation went into effect on the 28th of February, 2013. Bergoglio arrived on the 27th. Now, one might think that, you're going to arrive in Rome, you're a cardinal, you might meet other cardinal friends and things like that. But no, he dined with four Italian journalists. Two of them were Vaticanisti, Andrea Tornielli and Gianni Valente, who was the founder of Trenta Giorni, or 30 Days, which was a prominent, I don't think it's around anymore, but it was a prominent Vatican inside type journal. And he met with them. We don't know what happened in that meeting. That'd be interesting to hear what happened there. What we do know, though, is about 2 days later, March 2nd, Tornielli published this article in Vatican Insider about his opening line to his article was the famous line, 4 years of Bergoglio would be enough to change the church.
Yeah.
And he doesn't mention in that article that he had dinner with Bergoglio a couple nights before. And that same phrase, 4 years of Bergoglio, popped up a lot of different places. I mean, it popped up with, the famed influential Italian gentleman that appeared with McCarrick, but it also was a line attributed to Cardinal Murphy O'Connor. And there was also another South American cardinal, Suis, I probably can't pronounce his name right. He was also quoted by yet a separate journalist. So you have like 3 or 4 different people using that line. And my theory is that that Bergoglio is the ultimate source of that. And he's used lines like that, like in that Mexican interview we did, I think in 2014 or 15 with a Mexican journalist, where we talk about, I think I'm only going to have 4 or 5 years to be Pope. And that was one of the concerns with his age at the time. He's 76 years old. He's too old to be elected. So you can see how the 4 or 5 year thing came out as almost like a talking point, like, hey, I can do this in 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And that's kind of like my hypothesis, that actually he said it. And then everyone else kind of took it and ran with it, and kind of filtered that through, their various conversations at the conclave.
That's very interesting. That's extremely, extremely interesting. Now, I don't want to force you into something that you're not committing. You're taking a guess. You have an interesting theory about the identity of that certain Italian gentleman, right? And just a guess that it was mentioned by McCarrick, don't you? You want to say?
Yeah, I do. And I do. And I don't take credit for his name popping up. I mean, when I was researching, I had when I was trying to profile who I thought the guy could be, this influential Italian gentleman, I was thinking probably a journalist or maybe some prominent layman who's involved with a charity in Rome or something, because that's the way that the character described the guy, prominent, influential guy in Rome. But then I saw on an Italian blog that someone threw out the suggestion. It was Andrea Riccardi, who is the founder of the community of Sant'Egidio, which is very well known, very prominent, very influential lay institution within the church that is very well connected with the cardinals. It's in 70 countries. Zuppi, who is talked about as a possible papabile, is closely tied to it. So Andrea Riccardi, as it turns out, has a history, according to Sandro Magister, of politicking or lobbying. He wrote an article on this guy many years ago that he was trying to influence. He was lobbying like crazy for Tetamanzi in the 2005-2006 conclave. So he's done this kind of thing before. He's close. He's the self-described convinced Bergoglian. Riccardi is. He wrote these. He's written that, and then also it turns out he's close to McCarrick. He wrote the foreword. McCarrick wrote a foreword for a prayer book. You can find this on Amazon. I forget. The title of it's in one of my articles. But McCarrick wrote the foreword to one of his prayer books that Riccardi wrote. So it seems to me that there's a strong case to be made that Riccardi's it. I would like to see maybe some enterprising Catholic journalist in Rome might, stick him in the elevator and ask him that question. Will you did you ever meet McCarrick at the North American College on March 2nd or 3rd, 2013? It'd be interesting to see. But the question is then, if that is him or whoever it is, what did Bergoglio, did they go at the behest of Bergoglio? And the suggestion from Viganò, certainly in his testimony, is that is the case.
Yeah. Can you refresh our recollection
Sure.
why Viganò attests that is the case?
Oh, Viganò in his testimony was at the Summer of Shame, was that 2018?
18, yeah.
18. He talks about how McCarrick had worked for his election, for the election of Francis, and he references his Villanova talk that McCarrick gave in October of 2013, where he mentions this meeting on videotape with this influential Italian guy who came to visit him. But then afterwards, because of his assistance, that Francis, according to Viganò, Francis had rewarded McCarrick by kind of taking off the the chains kind of that Benedict had put on him because of his indiscretions, and he was rewarded, and he went to China actually to engage in some diplomatic activity on behalf of Francis. So
yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. When we're about out of time here, Steve,
sorry.
but let me, you give the parting shot on what the relevance of what I'm about to read. It's again from your article. It's a quote. Everyone will recognize it. Has a lot to do with me beginning to make videos on YouTube with Taylor Marshall there. But what is the relevance of this to the relevance of the question, is Francis actually Pope at all? You write this in the middle of this LifeSite news article from October the 26th of this year. Speaking to reporters in an airplane press conference, Pope Francis refused to comment on Viganò's accusations. You just named the accusations in so many words, choosing instead to respond quite obscurely. This has to be the centerpiece, I think, of all of these theories and conjectures about Francis. Here's what he said. And no one even talks about this. Trads, right-wing Novus Ordo Catholics, people have forgotten about this. He says, I will not say a single word about this. I believe the statement speaks for itself, and you have the journalistic capacity to draw your own conclusions. That doesn't make any sense. Journalists drawing their own conclusions. It is an act of faith for journalists. When some time passes and you have drawn your own conclusions, meaning yay or nay, I may speak. But I would like your professional maturity to do the work for you. It will be good for you. That's good. This is the oddest thing ever said to a room of journalists who abided that strange paternalistic admonition. You say Pope Francis bizarrely insisted that it should be journalists who do the work of assessing the accusations against him rather than he who should respond to their questions. Can you just, as a parting shot, Steve, because we got to get out of here, say what this has to do with everything we're talking about Francis or Benedict as Pope?
Well, it links back. I brought that up in the context of whether or not Tornelli, my hypothesis is Tornelli wrote that article where he said the 4 years of Bergoglio back in 2013. He wrote that on behalf with Bergoglio's knowledge, which would be interesting because that plot would have happened on the 27th of February, which would have been when Benedict was still Pope. So that might have some significance canonically. But so just to show that as evidence, I think that they were working in collusion, is that you fast forward to the quote that you read from Francis. That was when he was coming back from Ireland after the Viganò testimony first came out. And everyone's asking Francis, what about this and all that? And he had no answer other than what you just read. And what's curious is that 2 months after he said that, Tornelli and Valente jointly published a book, which kind of basically threw the fault for McCarrick on to Benedict and John Paul II. And I think they threw Viganò under the bus to boot. Now, 2 months is a pretty quick time to write a book, do research and stuff. I mean, you will know that and get it out. I wonder, given what Francis said, it seems to me that he had foreknowledge that Tornelli and Valente were writing this book. In fact, I also wonder, I didn't put it into the article, I actually wonder if Francis commissioned it right after the McCarrick thing became public, a few months earlier, because he foresaw that there would be questions about his linkages to McCarrick. So I think that this book was actually already in the works. And that's why he knew this and could say, because the journalists he was referring to and had faith in were his own journalists, Tornielli and Valenti, that this book was going to come out.
Right. These are hagiographies that he's anticipating.
Exactly.
Very interesting. The point is this. Okay. Thanks for coming on today, Steve. It's been amazing. I'd probably like to have you back on because we only skimmed the surface of this. And I think a follow-up show, maybe just called part 2 of this, would be good. There is a wealth of mystery still yet unexplored about Francis. One little instance. He was a bouncer in his earlier life. I heard 1 or 2 stories allege that he was a bouncer at a not-so-savory type nightclub earlier in his life. You can't find that. I was researching that a week ago. I couldn't find that before Thanksgiving. That's just one little instance. And everything you've talked about here today, Steve, there is so much fascinating, interesting, piquant conversation starting mystery wrapped in an enigma shrouding the Francis pontificate that it could take us the rest of our lives to talk about and to research. And yet trads online will bark, up these wrong trees all the time. And it's like, look, the most interesting, the most intellectually compelling tree is that other one there. No dogs are barking up that tree. And they're pretty obvious trees to bark up. So that's what I want to do, is maybe help to recalibrate people. Look, if you're really, really big on Francis is not Pope, well, look at this tree. I think putatively he's definitely Pope, and we're going to have to wait and see. But go to this tree. Other people that have the time and the energy to do this nonstop, other podcasters, content makers, go to this tree. And that's why I thought it was valuable to have you on, Steve. We'll link all 3 of your articles. I'll link one of your books as well in the show notes. Steve is a great researcher and a great writer, and I will have you back on, Mr. Steve, next time. Stephen O'Reilly, thanks for being on the show. Parashorvins and Retrogrades, God bless you, and have a heck of a weekend. Thanks, Steve.
You too. Thanks a lot.